Wonderful. Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. Gweithio bawb. Welcome to the show and tell, which is focusing on the work that we're doing on service assessments. This is us. We're a small team at CDPS. We've been working on an alpha to inform the future model for service assessments in Wales, and we're taking a test and learn approach to that alpha work, and we're using experiments to organise the test and learn around. We'll be doing 3 experiments across the alpha. The goal for our work is to understand what the end-to-end service should be around service assessments, how that should be operated, and who should operate it, so who's needed to deliver and support that service effectively. So in this show and tell, we're going to share the output and the outcomes from our first alpha experiment, and then a bit about the remaining alpha work that we'll be doing in the coming weeks. So today we'll cover some background to the work, how we're approaching the alpha phase, what we've done and learned so far, and then we'll share more about our next steps. And there should be about 10 minutes at the end for questions. Okay, so first of all, a bit of context for those of you who aren't familiar with the work that we're doing. The team as a whole is focused on delivering the current mission, which is to create a service that helps teams to build good digital services that are aligned with the digital service standards for Wales, and that supports SROs to make informed risk-based decisions on whether to proceed, pause or stop delivery of products, services and projects. Our work has been separated into 2 streams of delivery. The first focuses on a future offer for all Wales, and the second, which you see on the right-hand side, is to work directly with teams in Welsh Government to assess their services, so to do some actual service assessments. The goal for that second stream of work is to assess 6 services by the end of this financial year. And just moving back to stream 1, which is the future offer, we've got 3 goals there to achieve. They are to design a model for service assessments, to know how to operate that model, and then to identify and upskill a network of assessors for Wales. And just to be clear, the services and assessors will be centred around the digital service standards for Wales, which is separate and differs in some areas from I think the ones that people might be familiar with, which are the GDS service standards used in central government. Just to highlight, it's not the work of this team to refine the service standards themselves, but rather to make recommendations for a model that can be used to assess or review services that are being delivered by teams in Wales to Welsh residents. The focus of the show and tell today is the work on the future service, but because there is some crossover with the second stream of work, Poppy's also going to give a brief update on that during next steps section. So what's our approach for alpha? So by the end of alpha, we're aiming to create an end-to-end version of a service offer, including a clear place to find and enter an assessment service. We know how the service could be operated with a small number of organisations in a private beta, and then over time we scale the offer to implement a model across the public sector in Wales. That's the current thinking. So a bit more detail about how we're approaching the alpha. So as I said, we're taking an experiment-based approach. But what I would say first is that there's a lot that's already known about service assessments, how to operate them, what the outcome should be, for example. There's a lot of work been done already, and not least all the previous work that Central Gov has done on these. It's not new, we know this. And we're not aiming to relearn those things, but rather centre a service offer around the specific and some unique needs of Wales. So this alpha is going to plug the gaps in our current knowledge whilst reusing as much of what has been tested and validated previously to create that end-to-end service around offering service assessments to teams in Wales. So we're undertaking 3 experiments in Alpha. The goal of the experiments to understand what the specific end-to-end assessment should be, how it should be operated, who's needed to deliver and support it effectively. And those 3 experiments basically cover those 3 points sequentially. If you're interested, this is the timeline. They'll all conclude by the 10th of October. We've completed experiment 1 already, and that's what we're going to predominantly talk about today. So we're going to share the outcomes of the first experiment, and then later on details of the remaining Alpha work. Okay. So hopefully that gives you a flavour for what we're aiming to do. So now we're going to get into the interesting stuff and talk a bit more about the detail of what we've learned. Over to Gabby.
Thanks, Vic. Okay, so on to methodology. So we have, is that updating for you? There you go. We have spoken to 6 people in this first experiment. So noting that's quite a small sample, but as Vic said, we've got those 2 further experiments to further validate what we've learned in this first round. So we ran interviews and usability tests as a dual session. So we had 5 service team members, which included people like researchers, designers, product and delivery folk, and then we had 1 leader as well. And within that, we looked to get 1 Welsh speaker and also a variety of experience with service assessments. We were looking for the whole spectrum of people that it was completely new to versus people that have been through service assessments in central gov, and then also a variety of sectors as well. So we spoke to people from sponsored bodies, arm's length bodies, Welsh Government, health and central UK Gov as well, because somebody was delivering a Welsh service. So yeah, just some limitations of that. We've only spoken to 1 leader, so we do really want to prioritise those in the next round because we think that's going to be really important for the next experiment. And then, like I say, it's a small sample, but we'll look to further validate what we've learned in our next phases. So just to show you the prototype that we showed, so we mocked this up just to solidify what we'd learned so far and to give people something to critique and comment on. So these were just flat screens. They weren't live on the CDPS website. They were just literally flat screens for people to comment on. And we asked lots of questions around what their understanding of service assessments were, why they were needed, and then also some information around what happens at a service assessment to just really kind of stress test how that would work in practice and what their thoughts were on how that would fit into their existing processes. So we learned lots of interesting stuff from that. And we also included a book a service assessment form. So for anyone who's freaking out about us not using the right patterns, you can see that is a Microsoft form. We wouldn't stick to a Microsoft form, but it was just there for the purpose of the test. So yeah, we just prompted again some conversation points around how they would expect to book that and what information they would need to provide and how they'd feel about going through that process. So I'm going to now dive into that a little bit further. So as a summary of how experiment 1 went, our hypothesis was that we believe that if CDPS provides a clear and accessible service assessment offer and owns the assessment process, teams will understand the value of assessments and sign up to gain reassurance they're designing services in the right way. And how we aimed to measure that was to see if 5 to 10 people wanted to sign up for an assessment, and then also to assess if the feedback demonstrated that people felt confident and they had a good understanding and saw the value and trusted CDPS enough to operate that assessment process, including providing that access to the service as well. And the results were overwhelmingly positive. There's definitely lots of good insight that we've got, and we'll go into more detail in a minute. But as a high level, everyone we spoke to was keen for some form of service assessment offer, and we felt confident that they would sign up for an assessment, or they'd ask their teams to, or that they'd advocate for it. And the overarching view was that a review type approach would be more appropriate for the Welsh context than more of that formal GDS style pass fail service assessment for the whole process. We saw that there was most value in that more indicative meets or doesn't meet point for each individual standard rather than it being an overall reflection. And we saw a preference as well for that centrally coordinated assessment process. So it felt like CDPS is well positioned to adopt that from the feedback that we saw. And that would include pulling together an appropriately experienced panel of assessors across the sector as well. And yeah, in general, there was a really good understanding of service assessments, why they're needed and the value that they bring from the content that we put out there. And that hasn't even been through a content designer or anything yet. So really positive results. In terms of the themes, we saw 7 overarching themes, and I'm going to dive into each of those with some more specific findings now. So the first one was around there is appetite for a supportive, constructive external review, as I've already mentioned. So I'd say there's strong interest in that. And the key thing was that it needs to be supportive and peer-led and from that external source as well. So there was seen to be real value in not having that just internally, but having that kind of external eye to make sure that there was that alignment with digital standards for Wales. And like I've mentioned, CDPS was thought to be well placed to be the central coordinator of that. There was lots of importance placed on that panel being an experienced panel. So there wasn't so much of an expectation on who exactly would make up that panel, but as long as they do have experience with the digital service standard for Wales and also the Welsh speaking element. So we did hear particularly from one person who has been doing Welsh delivering Welsh services, but in England, that's a real gap at the moment for them, and they would really expect, you know, that Welsh speaking and that Welsh understanding of the digital service standard to get that experience from the panel in Wales. And also there was a clear need for information on the CDPS website and that ability to request a review via us as well. So obviously we tested that prototype and that tested really well and would definitely recommend continuing that. So you can see some quotes on the right here, and that support was really clear. So there have been instances where past service assessments that people have been through have felt more like a beating, more like a critique, and actually this in Wales feels much more closely aligned to needing peer support and assurance. So we're not there to criticise, we're there to encourage them. And then, yeah, there's just another quote there saying that it would be useful to know if it's going to meet the standards or not. So our recommendation for this is to continue with what we've started, but also to potentially rebrand it from an assessment to a review. The word review feels softer. Assessment had connotations of what the UK Gov service assessment process looks like currently, and review was thought to be a more appropriate word. The second theme is around this self-led review. So a self-led review was seen to be more appropriate initially as a tool for some teams. So we had lots of comments around wanting a clear checklist to self-review against, so potentially before coming through a service review. And there was a desire to have clear examples of what good services look like. So I know we talk lots about case studies and things like that, but I think there was a real need to see what services have been through a service assessment previously to be able to understand what helped them pass, what enabled them to pass, what does that actually look like in practice, and how did teams achieve that. And I think, so we received a few comments around how service assessments could be seen to cause fear in teams, making them feel, like I've said, that they're being critiqued and maybe pointing out where they haven't done good enough. And self-led reviews were thought to be a nicer way to ease into it. So, if teams could have this checklist or this self-led review before entering a more formal process, they'd be able to kind of self-assess and maybe sort some things before they came in. And that might lower the barrier to engagement as well. Because I think at the moment, the model we're looking at is this self-nominated model. We're not going to tell people that they have to come necessarily. So it's fair to say that we might receive low uptake if there is that perception around it being something that might cause fear in them, or they get a critique. Then I think that's something that we need to be mindful of. But I think as well, it's really positive to see that some teams are already aligning well with the standards and may not need a formal assessment. So this could well be something that supports them, but not needing that formal assessment. It's just that final check and reassurance within their team. And I think we saw as well some concerns raised around the expected time burden of assessment. So within the prototype, we included details around the timings. So looking at 4 hours for an assessment as standard, and that did indicate some concerns from particularly delivery managers who were starting to consider how they might fit that into their timelines and things like that. So our recommendation on that would be to develop self-review resources, including examples of what good looks like in a really practical sense, and then that practical checklist as well. On to theme 3. So outcomes are expected to support UCD buy-in with senior leaders. So external expert reviews were seen as a valuable thing for backing user-centered design recommendations with senior leaders. So we heard stories of where service teams would find that a really useful, tangible thing to be able to present back to their leaders, to be able to kind of advocate and prioritize some things that perhaps haven't got traction in the past. And I think there was an expectation that leaders would respect the outcomes and act on the findings. And of course, this is why we are looking to prioritise this group in the next round, because this is anecdotal evidence at the moment. We've mostly spoken to service teams. So I think if you do know any leaders that would be good for us to speak to understand how this would land for them, we'd be really keen for experiment 2. And we saw as well that teams wanted scored feedback and clear recommendations specifically for each standard point to identify their strengths and gaps. I know that Central Gov have been on their own journey, so it used to be pass and fail, and that was seen to be quite rigid and strict, and again caused that fear. I know that they've moved to met, partially met, and then not met now, which feels probably like what we'll look at. But then there were also comments around, a 1 to 5 rating, red, amber, green. So I think that's something we'll look to test soon. But that was definitely a desired thing, to be able to benchmark where they're sitting on each standard point. And the recommendation there is to test how those review outputs influence senior leadership decisions. So we'll be looking to do that in the next round of research. Theme 4, so there was low visibility and adoption of existing standards in Wales. So this might feel like a big one, and we did learn lots of really interesting insights to this. So I think it's fair to say there is confusion around what standards are in place in Wales and how they relate to each other at the moment. So because we spoke to lots of different organisations, it was really interesting to understand the different perceptions and understanding of how they're embedding those currently in their ways of working. So some participants referenced the UK Gov standards and seemed to be unaware of the Welsh standards. So I do think there's a job there to be had around making sure that there's that promotion and that awareness of the difference, because of course there are differences and they're important for us in Wales to acknowledge. I think as well, the digital service standard for Wales was seen as a nice to have. So unlike regulated areas that already exist, so like accessibility in Welsh language, we did hear that, they really acknowledge that, or the people that have that awareness acknowledge the importance of it, but it's difficult for them to prioritise when it's not mandated. So you'll see here at the bottom, somebody said quality assurance for us equals accessibility and aligning to GEL. So there are things that people know they have to adhere to, and that's quite strict in their organisation. And unfortunately, the service standard for Wales is not always being held to that same priority because of the mandate. I think as well, this is probably an obvious point to make, but a really important one. The digital maturity across organisations varies a lot. So we saw a few using DDAT frameworks and some lacking digital governance structures. And therefore that's leading to this lack of understanding and adoption as well of the service standards. So it's a really important point that affects how services assessments could work. And recommendations for that. So I think it's going to be important to identify those barriers to the wider adoption of the digital service standard in Wales. So I know we've got a team working on the service standard in CDPS, so we'll be picking that up with them to share some more of the specific findings. But I do feel there's a real opportunity there to get under the skin of what's happening there. And then also working with the Digital and Data Standards Board more closely to just clarify that standards landscape and to drive consistency across Wales. Number 5, so organisations' governance processes need to work with the service assessment offer. So again, the people we spoke to were really generous in sharing how things are working for them in their internal organisations. And, you know, this isn't a surprise, but it's maybe something that we just need to really acknowledge in our design of service assessments, is that organisations already have their internal change management and release processes. They've got internal steering groups, they've got frameworks that are all guiding them, guiding digital services, particularly around that technical delivery and code quality we saw. And we spoke to somebody from health as well, and I think it's clear that the standards there may not fully align with the digital service standard for Wales, and in some cases are using different language. So I think we really need to make sure that we're clear on how those things can align and complement each other. And final decisions were seen to sit with internal senior leaders. So if you imagine you've gone through the assessment process, you've got your clear recommendations out the back of that, they may not align with business priorities. So it's just something that we need to be aware of. And as I've already mentioned, there's no current mandate to enforce the service assessment actions. So I think what would be great is if we could collaborate with pilot organisations in the future to better understand their governance and change processes to make sure that the service assessment is working alongside that and complementing it rather than conflicting. Theme 6 was around service team setups, dictating what is most useful to take through a service assessment. So really interesting. We learned lots of different perceptions around when a service assessment would be most useful to teams, and really different views on that. So I think that can be said to be due to the fact that different teams have different structures, different digital maturity. So we heard of teams who have really strong technical abilities, and then they would find perhaps going through a service assessment at discovery more useful because they'd be able to understand what is needed to keep their project or what is needed to start off their project in a really strong way, versus other teams perhaps on the flip side of that finding support offer more useful before they go to private beta to make sure that they're launching and putting something live that has ticked all the boxes. So I do think our process needs to acknowledge that and be flexible. And I think as well, we heard a huge variety in how people are adopting the Discovery Alpha Beta Live framework as well. That's really varied. So all really affects how the service assessment works. And interestingly as well, we saw that assessments are seen as valuable for reviewing the quality of supplier and outsourced work. So we heard a couple of times that sometimes on occasions when we're feeling a bit further away from our outsourced work, this could be a really good way to make sure that it's aligning with the quality that we need to see and what's needed for the service standard as well. So again, recommendation, I think this is something that can be further explored in experiment 2 to just really understand which teams are going to benefit most and at what stage as well. So for CDPS, I think it's going to be really important to identify, where can we start with this? To scale this for everyone in Wales, for all their different needs, is going to be incredibly difficult. So I think we need to start at who's going to benefit most from this and what stage would that be? And then lastly, theme 7, so owning the action plan after assessment was seen to be the team's responsibility. So here we really wanted to understand who's responsible for actually making sure that the changes were made. And it became really clear that teams would be responsible for that. And I think service and product owners were expected to request the assessments and kind of lead on making sure that the team were aware of what that entailed and all of that side of things. But then ultimately the leadership and driving that action comes from that whole team. And I think, that highlights a need to align with their existing internal processes and frameworks. So the recommendation again is to include that in experiment 2 to understand how those recommendations would be handled in practice. And again, that's where we'll look to speak to leaders as well. And then finally, we just got a couple of other findings. So we did ask people to search for service assessments using their browser, and it became clear that those are not really showing the clear results that we would want. So there's some work there to improve our SEO to make sure that there's a really clear place for people to be able to find out about service assessments and direct users to a clear place. And then lastly, there's also, I think, having an online form on CDPS's website really tested well, and that's something that we should continue. I think there needs to continue to be that one place to request that assessment. And I will hand back over to Vic to cover next steps.
Lovely. Thank you, Gabby. Okay, so let's talk about what's next then. So I said there were 3 experiments. We've done experiment 1. We're taking a short break, actually, and then we're going to be returning to do the remaining 2 experiments. Experiment 2 will focus on, so given that most delivery teams in Wales don't use the Discovery Alpha Beta life cycle, which is what Central Gov and their service assessment offer is based around, we need to learn at what phase in a delivery life cycle should service assessments happen, and what language should we use to describe those phases in a relatable way for service teams. So we also need to learn what the outputs of a service assessment should be. So what's the most useful thing for a team to be able to work with and action any recommendations. Also, how does this sit alongside some of the existing internal governance, such as the change management and release management processes? I can see a hand up. If you don't mind, I'm just going to finish off this slide and then we've got a Q&A section. So if you could just hold off asking your question until that point, and then your question will be very welcome. Yes, so that's experiment 2, and we expect that to conclude around about first week of September. Then we'll move on to experiment 3. So after each experiment, we will do a show and tell like this to share the results of the experiment. And then at the end, we're going to do a more wide-reaching, I suppose, playback that combines everything that we've learned doing these experiments through the whole alpha. In our next 2 experiments, we're looking for people to research with. We'd love you to get involved. If you lead digital transformation within your organisation or department, or are a leader that's interested in or might advocate for service assessments, then we would really love to hear from you. 2 QR codes here that you can use to sign up to participate in our research. And I said at the start that we've got 2 streams of work happening. So Poppy's just going to come in now and give you a very quick update on what's happening on the other stream.
Yes, thanks, Vic. Hi, everyone. So, as mentioned, CDPS is delivering digital service standard assessments on behalf of Welsh Government, with the aim of completing at least 6 assessments by the end of financial year next year. So, again, as referenced, this work complements and supports the development of a wider assessment framework and model for Wales, and it's being shaped collaboratively with the work that Gabby and Vic have been conducting. So as part of the service assessment development work, we've been designing a set of Wales specific resources and tools that align with the digital service standards. So these have included things such as a new Wales-based service assessment guide and assessment materials tailored to the Welsh context, the Welsh language and delivery approaches in Wales. So we're currently working really closely with the Welsh Government digital team to identify and engage with teams who may benefit from a service assessment. So if you are interested, or if you're aware of anyone who might be interested, then there is a QR code on the screen to an expression of interest form. But we also encourage individuals to reach out directly for informal conversations. We'd love to hear from you. And just to recap, really, in terms of, you know, what a service assessment can offer. So, you know, we firmly believe that by teams taking part in service assessments, it gives teams the chance to take a step back and reflect on how their services are aligning with the digital service standards for Wales. We think it allows for that constructive conversation with experienced assessors to understand the realities of public service delivery, you know, and cover risks early and identify opportunities to strengthen your service, boosting confidence across teams as you prepare for the next delivery phases, whether that's moving into an alpha or a beta or scaling. You know, it's not a pass or fail exercise. You're receiving supportive and structured, you know, content and a supportive and structured review. And so, again, we're just really especially keen to work with teams who are in or are approaching the end of discovery, alpha or beta phases. So please feel free to scan the QR code on screen. I believe we might be circulating these slides later on to attendees for you to refer back to the QR code, or again, just reach out to us directly, and we'd love to talk to you about the possibility of bringing you on the journey. I think we're going on to open the floor to Q&A, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we are. Thanks. Thank you, Poppy. Okay, so that's enough of us talking to you. Does anybody have any questions, reflections that they would like to share? Yes, Janine.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Just a quick point of clarification, which I think you clarified anyway, Vicky, but it was talk as part of the presentation about the service assessments being for Welsh Government services, but as I understand it, the service assessments can be undertaken on non-Welsh Government services as well. It's just that you're working with us. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah. So the initial or the next 6 actual service assessments, I think the priority is that we should be working with teams in Welsh Government, but the future service that is being designed, the intention is for that to be an all Wales. So any team working on a digital service for residents in Wales, so public sector, and we are making sure that we're speaking with, you know, a really wide range of organisations and teams within those organisations to make sure that that they're represented and that we fully understand that much wider context. So definitely not limiting it to Welsh Gov.
Great. Speaking on behalf of Welsh Government, if another service did come forward in that 6, then if it was really ready and really valid, then we wouldn't want to stand in their way. So happy to be flexible and not take up the first 6 slots if you've got a really good candidate or candidates.
Thank you for that, Janine. Yeah, so if you are sitting and listening to this, then I guess, and you're thinking, you know what, love to got a service that would really benefit from having an assessment, then just reach out, get in contact, and we can take it from there. I can see another hand up. Yes, Myra.
Hi, morning. Thank you for a great presentation and really good piece of work, and it's really interesting and helpful, and I'm really glad we're approaching it in such a thorough way. The bit that I'm interested in and keeps me awake at night is the distinction and value of the different service standards, and in particular our users' understanding of that, or our target users' understanding of that. So that's around, you had it in a slide, you know, it's around the GEL, the GDS standards, the digital service standards for Wales, and how those fit together so that they all add value and they form a coherent offering that maximizes return on investment and makes sense to our target users. Can you just say a little bit about how you've identified it as a challenge? So that's helpful. Can you just say a little bit about how you're going to delve into that in the next phase? Because I think that would be really helpful. And you know, I think that kind of assurance is really important. Thank you.
Yeah. Shall I take that one? Yeah. Okay. So our next experiment is specifically going to focus on looking at what point should service assessments happen directly. And I think the key to unlocking how we should move forward with a clear understanding of how all the different standards, principles, internal processes work together is about us working more directly with the standards board, in, you know, being honest with you. You know, there's a good spread of people from right across Wales within that board who can represent their own organisations. They're already thinking about the various different standards, which ones are important, which ones should be adopted in Wales. So in terms of how we bring that together, we do see, we had a conversation about this the other day, we do see that as being working closely with that group as being the key to kind of unlocking our understanding of you know, how do we ensure that it all works together, and most importantly, how do we communicate that to teams that are trying to deliver services in that context. Once we've got that clarity, then we can work to make sure that we are communicating it in the right way. So we can make sure that the content on the CDPS website, for example, and anything in our service manual, you know, all aligns to support that. But yeah, I do think that working closely with that board is kind of the thing that's going to really unlock that for us.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I think we looked at the page on the CDPS website at the minute where we've got all of the standards nicely laid out, and they're all, you know, they're quite wide ranging actually, and for a service team to be able to look at that and meaningfully unpick what does that actually mean, I think that's what we're scratching the surface of with the checklist and the self-led review and things like that. I think there's more that we can do to make sure that that isn't just a list of lots of words that a really stressed and overwhelmed team are on their own to try and unpick and digest. I think we need to make that a bit more meaningful and tangible to people.
Thanks, Myra. Is that a legacy hand, or have you got a follow-up?
No, I've got a follow-up because this is a great opportunity for me to ensure that Harriet and mine concerns with this development of this work are addressed. So I'm coming back with the second one. The other point that you've picked up, which also keeps me awake at night, and I'm really glad you've captured it, is capacity for change and timing. So how do we ensure, and whether this is an onboarding question, how do we ensure, you know, for example, we've got 6 coming through the pilot pipeline this year. One question for me is, at what point in the development cycle and at what maturity of a service does our service offer around service assessments add value? Because the partner that we're working with has the capacity and skills to change. Now, I know we've got to be realistic. We're not assessing, you know, really developed, incredibly well-funded, mature services, but can we develop a model that fits to enable, again, the return on investment to be really good?
Yeah, I think you raise a really, really important point there, Myra. And experiment 2 is really going to face into that. You know, also, how do you describe it? You know, so if teams don't use Discovery Alpha Beta Live, which is the GDS standard, they do still have delivery life cycles. You know, they are very, very experienced at delivering. So how do you, what's the language that we should use to describe the phases that is relatable right across teams in well? So experiment 2 is really going to face into that. But in terms of, you know, picking up on, I guess, the second point there, which is about how do you provide a service that is scalable and has the right capacity and so on. The learnings from this alpha work is going to give us lots of information around that, and that's why we're suggesting that the next stage would be to go into private beta, because it allows you to throttle that capacity, really control who, and be really specific about who are we initially targeting. So imagine that we do these 3 experiments. At the end of it, I think this is what we've got in our heads. We'll be able to come up with a clear recommendation for a starting point. And that starting point in terms of who the service should be for and at what point in their delivery life cycle should it happen. That's going to be what we'll take into private beta. Let's test that, and then during the course of private beta, we're looking to scale. So then going into public beta is the point at which, ideally, in this service life cycle, that the scale starts to happen. So opening it up to more organisations, perhaps different phases of their delivery life cycles as well. But yeah, that's kind of, we're proposing to follow that alpha beta, private beta, public beta, live life cycle in order to be able to manage this really well. I've got a couple of hands up. Emma's next.
Thanks, Vic. Yeah, I just wanted to make a brief comment, really. Obviously, we mentioned that this is not a mandatory thing to do, but I think as part of the comms piece, it would be really important to say, you know, why it matters, you know, and some of the wins, because that's so important. So we're talking about, you know, faster services, happier citizens, you know, public sector can lead on the change. They're going to improve their digital kind of literacy. They're going to save time and money and actually demonstrate impact and improvement. So I think that's just going to be just as important as part of this work, is actually really being clear on what are the benefits here, and, you know, moving away from that, it's just a kind of tick box kind of exercise. This have got such enormous potential to drive real change and impact, and for the citizens of Wales. So that's the key emphasis, I think, that needs to be threaded throughout this work, really, and to ensure that we do get that buy-in from leadership, which is critical, as we know, moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I think in terms of how we make sure that that happens in the right way, it's really important that the various teams who are working on different elements of this. So, for example, the service manual work that's happening, plus all of the content on the CDPS website, and then content on other websites, so Welsh Gov, but then also organisations' own websites. You know, we need to make sure that that all aligns and is kind of saying the same thing in the same way. And that's why it's really important. Also, another reason why it's really important that we work closely with the Standards Board moving forwards as well. Okay, we've got, I'm conscious that we are officially out of time. We do have a couple of hands up. So if you've got time to stay, please do. We'll take those questions and then we'll wrap up. Jemima, do you want to come in?
Yeah, firstly, I just wanted to say that the team have done a really great job with this piece of work. They're a small team. They've gathered so much fantastic insight within a really short time, and this has been a really great show and tell. So well done, firstly, to the team who've delivered this. And secondly, I was just going to really reiterate that, you know, the findings here, they are relevant across the work that we're doing at CDPS and more broadly. And whilst not all of it necessarily is going to be addressed within the scope of these 3 experiments, you know, we are sharing that learning, sharing that knowledge where it's relevant across all of our other pieces of work too. And just the benefit of being really open and transparent in this way and doing show and tells like this and sharing that insight, I think is going to be really, really valuable. So yeah, thank you. And just a reassurance that, you know, all of this is going to be shared more broadly because it's really helpful insight.
Thank you for that, Jemima. I think that's a really good point to end. Let's do that. Let's wrap up. If you, by the way, if you were wanting to ask a question and didn't get the opportunity, you can just contact us. We're more than happy to follow up with you. So thank you very much, everybody. Diolch yn fawr. Our next show and tell is going to be the 4th of September at 10 o'clock. We'll send out the invites to that. And it will be focusing around what we've learned from doing the second experiment. Okay, that's it. We're done. Thank you very much, everybody.
Diolch, everyone.